What's up? It's your boy Gimpzilla coming at you with another gaming strategy video. This week we are going to be looking at the infamous Tomb of Horrors. As stated in the title, this is DM Tactics, so spoiler warning ahead. And then also for best practice and best use of this video, at least a quick glance over the module will benefit you extremely well. I'm not going to be giving you word for word here. I'm just going to give you kind of pointers on specific sections. Now, with that being said, the video gets divided into three parts. We're going to do my experience with the dungeon just briefly. We're going to move into story hooks and plot points that will bring your characters into the Tomb of Horrors. And then third and finally, we are going to just give some tips on bringing the dungeon to life and kind of keeping that gritty realism as best you can. So yeah, with that being said, make sure you guys do leave a thumbs up on the video. That's the single best thing you can be doing to help support this video and kind of spread Dungeons and Dragons into other people's inboxes here on YouTube. So always appreciated. And with that, let's just kind of start with my experience and what I've done with Tomb of Horrors. So this is obviously the 5e edition. This is from Tales of the Yawning Portal. I did take the time to get the original PDF as well. And personally, what I did was a kind of a combination of the two. This was like an amalgamation between the first edition and the 5e edition. Um, reading a lot about the Tomb of Horrors, it is not supposed to be completed. It's supposed to be a super scary place. Your player characters are not necessarily supposed to enjoy their walk through here, right? Asarak built this tomb to kill you. He did not build this tomb for your enjoyment. So that's kind of my experience with it and how I shaped it and approached the dungeon coming into it. I basically 5e minimizes the damage on a lot of these traps. Just for example, in this first hallway here, these are poison pit spikes, so if they are struck with poison, they literally die instantly in first edition. And in 5e, I think it does something like I don't even know. I'd have to look it up, but I think it does like 2d10 or something like that to fall into one of these pits. So one of these things is not like the other, and I went for as close to the original as I possibly could. So I did heighten the damage and the stakes in certain places that I felt appropriate. I really wanted that horror feel coming from the Tomb of Horrors. Now, the second thing I would note here is obviously if you've read the module, you're looking at it here and you realize, well, you didn't even complete the dungeon. You only have half of it exposed to your players, and you're absolutely right. I made it through 3 full sessions. I had them kill the final or the false lich, and then that triggers the illusion of the cave in. And I basically counted down from 10. The walls are caving in. What are you going to do? They decided to run out. They were happy with it. They thought that they killed Asarak. They were content with literally leaving the dungeon and not coming back. There wasn't a single person in the party who was like, was that the false lich? Or like, again, there was no intention there. Um, Perhaps if this was my campaign, I would poke these players a little bit more to say like, hey, he's not dead yet, or there's a cleric in town that is still getting signals from Asarak being on this plane. Um, but in my experience of just running Tomb of Horrors as a standalone adventure, I did not include this in any campaign. My players were content to leave after the false lich, and module as written says, hey, let them do that. If they wanna accept that as victory, then please do. And then just to kind of take that one step further, like I personally love that. Like I love the idea of my players going out and telling people that they killed Asarak in the Tomb of Horrors, and then kind of sharing their experiences with people, and then maybe getting that realization that um, maybe we didn't go as far there as we should have. So I thought it was a good ending of the campaign. Again, it took me about 3 sessions to get all the way down here, 3 4-hour sessions, and then I would estimate, kind of at the pacing everything was going, you're looking at another minimum like 3 to 4. I could see it going 5 to 6 as well. basically you're looking at probably 2 solid months of weekly 4-hour sessions to complete the Tomb of Horrors. So make sure you have a game group that's willing to stick through it. And I'll echo again kind of what's mentioned in the module here is that this dungeon is not for the faint of heart, and I'll get into that in the next 2 sections here. But yeah, just to reiterate that point again, my group was happy to leave after the False Lich. Even seeing on Roll20 and stuff that they only exposed half the map, like they were happy to get out of there as is. So with that, let's go ahead and shift it over to the story. Because I think that kind of explains why my characters were so quick to essentially exit the dungeon. And that's also what I feel is probably the biggest shortcoming for the Tomb of Horrors, and where you're going to need to do the most DM magic in your prep work is really fitting this place into into your campaign setting, excuse me, and then one step further than that, like giving an incentive to these players to delve into this dungeon. So module as written, it might sound a little weird, but there is literally no ending. So if you just read the module as written, like in theory they can kill Asarak, right? If they decide to do 50 attacks on a ghost that have no indication that you're doing anything to this ghost. But if you like stir up the ghost for 50 hit points, then Asarak comes into this realm and he basically just one-shots everybody anyways. Again, just module as written. Most players aren't even going to attack the ghost, would be my assumption, and because again, there's no indication, tips, hints anywhere in this dungeon that would tell your players to attack a ghost to no avail. Right? They'd just be swinging through air for 50 turns, and then the lich would be summoned, and that's the only true ending that I could read into was definitively killing Asarak. There's no like again, I did White Plume Mountain a couple weeks ago, and in that module, you had the Black Razor, you had the Wave, you had the Whelm, you have these legendary artifacts that are in this temple. This one literally has none of that. It's just kind of, Asarak's alive. He built this tomb to collect souls, and you have a map that leads to it. So if your players are willing to accept, that as the adventure hook, then go ahead and run with it. If you run a more story-driven campaign, I would probably just tell you to completely skip Tomb of Horrors, because it's genuinely very little story, very high dungeon crawl. And today's demographic is, for better or for worse, kind of against the dungeon crawls has been my experience. So, yeah, with that being said, there's really no good hooks to get in here. There's no definitive ending. And I think that was kind of why my characters were happy to just kind of run out of this room and and just be like, okay, well, that must be the ending, right? We killed the undead guy, the ceiling fell in, and we're good to go. And that's despite the fact that I told them that like the hill is still intact, and the tomb doesn't appear like an earthquake or a cave-in happened. Yeah, turn their head and walk the other way, because again, there's just no clean ending. There's no hint at an ending. So you would have to essentially work your DM magic there as best you can. Now let's shift gears into the final section, which is going to be just some tips to really bring this place to life. And kind of the first thing I'm going to highly recommend to people, if you are specifically running the 5e edition, go ahead and get the original module. Like, look at all this additional artwork here. I'm going to pull up a couple of these sheets real quick. Because, yeah, the 5e module essentially gives you like 5 or 6 photos, and that's about it. When the old school module, like, look, I can keep scrolling down. There's only a handful of these, but from the old school module, you can just see I'm pulling them up, pulling them up, pulling them up. The more character art you have, the better. Especially when you're dealing with rooms like this. The module is basically saying, hey, present the photo to them and let them decide. Like, you don't need to do any further descriptions. Like, here's the photo, run with it. And I think I'm going to go ahead and read the quote from Gary Gygax from the original module. And I think it had like a really good kind of message behind it for the DM. So again, this and I also felt kind of good reading the foreword from Gygax himself, right? Like this is the original creator. This is 1978. This is how the game is intended to be ran, and there's something about making that historical connection that really aligned with me. Um, so yeah, I'll just read this word for word for you guys and let you interpret it how you will. But read aloud the appropriate sections, but never give any additional information which player characters would have no way of knowing. Avoid facial expressions or voice tones which might give helpful hints or mislead players. The real enjoyment of this module is managing to cope, and those players who manage to do so, even semi successfully, will appreciate your refereeing property and allowing them to live or die on their own. So essentially, what Gary's telling us right there is minimum descriptions. The best way to run Tomb of Horrors to kind of start this third section out is exactly how Gygax puts it right there, which is um, you do minimum room descriptions, and it's up to the players to decide. Like, did you pull out a 10-foot pole? No, you fell down a pit in the first 5 minutes. I'm sorry about that. And then what they'll do is they'll get their 10-foot poles out and they'll start feeling out. Okay, you walk through a portal blindly. Why is that the dungeon master's fault in any way, shape, or form, right? In the reality of the situation is they are staring at a portal. They have no idea what's on the other side, and it's up to them and their characters to test it and prove it. So if you're the DM that has to come in and basically tell people like, well, you have a portal, and they're all like, I don't want to go through it, I don't want to go through it, and then you have to be the DM that steps up and says like, well, send a familiar through it or put your pole through it, like those kind of interactions are going to completely ruin the Tomb of Horrors as written. It's going to ruin the feel here, and then people are just going to picture it like Candyland or any other um, dungeon that you run them through, where they basically just sit there with their hands out and say, "Come on, DM, like give me a tip here. There's nothing I can do." So again, to get the grit, to get the fear in your characters, just literally read them the descriptions. Minimal. Don't tell them anything that's unrealistic for them to know at the time. And that's the best way to do it. And I genuinely think that my approach to this dungeon that way, um, first off, it allowed me to get the false lich ending, right? Because by that point of the dungeon, they were out of clues. They like were giving up on the poem that's given by Asarak. They were like, these clues aren't making sense. It's not lining up with anything that we're seeing. Um, the players genuinely felt stumped, and as I said, I had to kind of give them the hint for this coin door over here in room 14, and then I also had to do a small hint for the pit trap down here in the long corridor. So by that point of the dungeon, like the party was defeated, and it I don't think that that's a bad sign of DMing, and I would just emphasize that to players. Is I don't think it's a bad side to DMing. Um, the other half of this equation, like I've read plenty of blogs online, I've seen other YouTubers make videos on it. The videos where they give people like, here's your three scrolls of resurrection, and this place is really hard, and be careful because you don't want to lose your character. And then everyone's just so cautious, so afraid to step forward that like you're not going to experience any of the fun stuff. Um, and by fun stuff, I mean I had two players crawl through the yawning portal here into the Sphere of Annihilation. I got the false crypt lich ending. I sex changed a player through this portal down here on the chapel area. Um, and I also had a player get lost in this 100-foot pit, completely cut off from the party. And that was just because like I'm explaining things as it is in the dungeon and nothing else that the players are going to get. So you get a lot of really cool, fun interactions when you don't tell them that this is essentially the Tomb of Horrors, right? When you do everything in your power to just say, hey, it's up to you to kind of get through this place, and take that responsibility away from the DM, which is nice, right? Because I always feel like sometimes I got to babysit, grown adults, and I don't want to be doing that. I pulled out the dragon for a reason. Like I want to be killing you guys. Um, so yeah, that was just kind of the main takeaway I want you to understand when you do run this place is minimal descriptions, less is more. Your players are going to feel frustrated. They are going to get to the end of their rope where they're just basically like, I'm done with this spot. And honestly, that's how Gygax intended it. So I have no problem running it like that. And then I'll just piggyback real quick back to story points. So again, if you're hell bent on running Tomb of Horrors, if you absolutely want to do it, you need to consider reasons that your players are in here. You need to consider reasons on why they will continue, and you need to consider ways that they're going to get help in this dungeon beyond their own thoughts, right? Whether that's like an oracle or something, or a sending stone or something in their pocket. They will need tips. Like if you have intentions on getting all the way to Asarak at the very end, they will need tips. And it kind of goes back to other stuff I was reading before I ran the module here, and nobody's genuinely completed Tomb of Horrors, and I think I really agree with that after running it. Nobody has genuinely completed Tomb of Horrors. You have been given the ending by your dungeon master. So depending on your style, depending on your story, depending on how you want to run this place, again, it's written for little to no DM interaction, and I had a great time running it that way. Me specifically as the DM. Um, or you're gonna have to be DM heavy, at which point you're gonna lose like a lot of the horror and fear of this place. At which point it just becomes like a really boring dungeon because there's not many fights. It's a lot of just kind of problem solving through these little doors and mechanics. So yeah, with that, let's go ahead and focus in. I already told you guys I had two people walk through the mouth portal here. Um, just described it exactly what it looks like. You got the red tiles coming down here, you got the red tiles coming in here. Nobody really wants to walk through a misty portal. They're more confident in a black shaft that my group presumed to be a slide. Um, so yeah, I got 2 kills there just using the straight descriptions. Now, um, other tips that I would have, and again, I ran most of these rooms as exactly as written. The only one I took a little bit of liberty with was room 8, and I'll explain that here in just a moment. Uh, but I guess the bigger picture here is making sure that your players have those tips and hints that will want them to progress further in. So you do want to make sure, I guess, kind of the one DM like certainty that you want to give your players is the poem from Asarak. I think that was probably the single piece of the module that kept my players engaged the most, was the fact that they had this riddle to solve. It does sync up with some of the information that, I mean, it technically syncs up with everything if you, once you complete everything, but hindsight's 2020. Um, but my group was able to deduct some clues and tips out of the poem. Um, so if I kind of gave you one other thing, right, the 2 tips I've given you so far for running this place is run it as is, don't give them hints, just run it brutally, and less is more as the DM. The other major hint that will help you run this place successfully is make sure your players have this poem. Because again, they're going to be asking you questions, they're going to be asking you for hints and tips, and it's really nice to just be like, well, I mean, you guys have that poem, and that's about all you would say. They go in and read it for another 5 to 10 minutes, and then they start saying, oh, maybe we should go back to that tormentor. Like there was a tormented being on the walls there, and maybe we should go back and look that way. So I think the poem's necessary. I think running it minimally is necessary. And then the other tip I had for running this place was essentially if you're running it in 5e, at least reading the original module and getting some of that first edition, kind of gore out there. Uh, I'll just finish, I guess, with room 8. This will be quick. The module as written is like I don't really know what Gygax intended, right? Like it's this room with all these secret doors, and that's the only way to get through it is you have to go through these secret doors. As you walk through these rooms, the players are electrified. So essentially, the more time they spend in these rooms, the more damage they're going to take. Um, and then, like, in the module, they write it so that, like, this door has hinges on the bottom and needs to be pulled towards you, and this next door slides from right to left, and this next door like turns 360 and then pushes open easily. And again, I don't know what Gygax intended there. Like, if he literally just sat there and we're like, yeah, you find a door, but you don't know how it opens. And they're like, oh, I look for hinges on the top and I look for hinges on the bottom. Like, I don't know if that's what his players were doing, but no one in 2020 is going to have that level of detail. Like, nobody in their right mind is going to think to look on how the secret door operates. They will literally just tell you, I investigate for secret doors. And again, if you're going for the less is more approach, you don't really want to be poking them to be like, okay, like what kind of secret door are you looking for? Like, that's basically telling them there's a secret door there, but you're not going to let them through because they didn't tell you to turn it 360 and push. Again, I don't know how this room was intended to run. Um, the way I ran it though was a ton of fun, and I got a huge adrenaline rush out of my rogue who mostly did the front manning for it. So essentially, I sent them into the room, and he would investigate for traps. And what I would make him do is I'd say, okay, look, there's 3 walls. You have north, east, and south. Where are you looking for traps? And he'd say south wall because it's pretty obvious on this first one. Okay, yeah, you spot the trap. Take 1d10 from the electric shock. He's like, all right, I want to open the trap. All right, you open the trap. Take 1d10 from electric shock. All right, I want to move to the next room. Okay, 1d10 from electric shock as you move to the next room. Okay, now I'm in the next room. You have 3 walls. You see west, south, and east. What direction are you going? South again. Okay, perfect. Now I want to look for doors. 1d10. You guys kind of see what I'm doing, right? Every single time he'd tell me to do an action, I'd zap him for 1d10. And I think he ended up taking like 15 or 16 d10s by the end of the corridor here. And that was further hindered by me being as vague as possible and just saying, okay, there's 3 walls here. Like, I know you're looking for secret doors. Like, what wall are you looking for secret doors on? And I think that kind of had the same principle as Gygax in, like, these are specific secret doors that you need to find, compared to just saying I look for a secret door. Um, but yeah, it kept the adrenaline up. The rogue hit the wrong wall a couple times. He didn't realize that it's going to snake back north here. He thought it just would go straight through to the next corridor. And he also got held up in this big room down here. He wasn't sure which wall to check immediately there. So again, a ton of damage was dealt, and then after he kind of did all the scouting, the party came in and bulldozed a couple walls to make the path shorter for them to get through. But that was just kind of like the one room that I felt needed heavy modification from besides just reading the module, and I thought I'd give you guys those tips because again, I had a really good time running Room 8. Yeah, so hopefully this video comes together as somewhat coherent. I know I was kind of bouncing all over the place, but Tomb of Horrors, like, my final review here would be that this place is like extremely difficult to run as a dungeon master. The players are going to be disengaged if you run it as written. It's a really dry module, and I feel like the players of today's era, like, they're literally just not equipped to run dungeon crawls. Like, nobody quizzes them enough on this stuff in their normal games. Um, yeah, it's not a good kind of first round with somebody new. Like, if you have a new gaming group, I would not start with Tomb of Horrors. This genuinely needs to be something that the players are excited to get into and they know kind of what they're getting into. And I even had a group that was all for that, and they still lost their fire, guys. So again, a ton of fun for the DM. Um, I genuinely felt like my players were having fun, right? It's fun to watch your buddy crawl into a sphere of annihilation. It's fun to watch, your friend fall into a 100-foot pit, or get sex changed into a woman and naked at the front door of the dungeon. Like, these are fun things to experience as the players. But again, if you run it right, this place will be terrifying. It'll get to a point where players don't want to open doors, they don't want to progress, and it gets to a point where they're happy to just leave with kind of the false lich ending. So anyways, I hope this helped you guys out. I don't want to ramble on too long here. We're looking at like probably 20 minutes already. But as always, guys, I'm going to say thanks for tuning in. Make sure you leave a like. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And I will see you all next time.